Hello, I'm Jan Paynter, and I want to welcome you once again to our program, Politics Matters. We are delighted and very pleased to welcome back as our guest today, John Whitehead, to continue discussing his new book, A Government of Wolves, The Emerging American Police State. Welcome back, John.
Hey, thank you.
John, speak a little bit about Citizens United ruling, which is something I think about a lot. Our lawmakers are influenced by corporate interests all the time. This is obviously, as you think, and I think many of us think, very dangerous because we all become so inured to the idea of it that we don't notice really that our government is increasingly, and our lawmakers and politicians, bought and paid for. But there's a prevalent attitude that there's nothing we can do to change it, and so people become very apathetic. And one of the things I love about your book is you talk about what we can do to push back about this. So I wondered if you would talk a little bit about increasing our participation, and also at the beginning about, as I said, Citizens United and the implications.
Yeah, Citizens United's opinion basically said corporations are persons under the 14th Amendment, which means they have all the rights of an American citizen. That's a number. First of all, the 14th Amendment was not written for corporations. It was written for African Americans to give them equal rights. They were actually persons now. Under the original Constitution, as you know, they were 3/5 of a person. Very offensive. By giving corporations personhood, they have the same rights as anybody else. These are large corporate entities. What it does, it gives them special protection, and they take it and run with it. The corporatization of American life is a little scary. I'm not against large corporations. People will criticize me sometimes and say, you sound like you're anti-corporation. No, I'm not against corporations, but corporations exist for profit. Governments exist for one thing. Jefferson, Madison, they all said it, protect our freedoms. So when those two things converge, you have a large entity that's there to make money. Like I say, SWAT team raids at 80,000 across the country. Each year they get money for doing marijuana busts. So the government's got an incentive to make money. It's just like a lot of communities across the country now have red light cameras. All the studies, even a congressional study, shows that they increase rear-end crashes, but cities make millions of dollars from people doing rolling stops and things like that. So the governments are starting to become very corporate in how they view us as sort of consumers. They make money off of us. And very few people realize that. To me, at a certain point, that's going to become very dangerous. And again, if you go back and look at history, what was it Hitler said? Free enterprise can't exist in a democracy. That's an actual quote made off Hitler. He wanted free enterprise, but he wanted it controlled by the corporate entities. That's an actual quote. I read it, I went, oh, he hit it right. But like I said, when he came into power, I mean, the industrialists stepped out to the press and said, we just hired Hitler. So we don't want to go in that direction. If we can push that back, it'd be great. There are 25 lobbyists per congressman, 25 lobbyists. I talked to a friend that got elected about 8 or 9 years ago as a representative. I won't say who, but he said the first meeting he had in D.C., after he got elected, they were all congratulating. He said the room was full of about 150 people. And he called me, he said, I was shocked. He said 125 of those people were lobbyists. They weren't there to congratulate me. They were there to smooth me, give me a trip.
Oh, sure.
So, there's actually a drone caucus in the House of Representatives of about 50 guys that have ladies already sold out. And they admit it. They're part of the drone caucus. They want it, but I'll give you another story. I have a friend who works for a senator. He said when he first went up to work for him, he said, it really shocked me because they kept saying they needed their afternoons off on Tuesday and Thursday. He said, I couldn't figure out what they were doing. And then he realized, he said, it shocked me that Tuesdays and Thursdays on a number of days, they take the whole afternoon off, the congressmen, to connect with the corporate lobbyists and stuff. That's a little scary because, and again, I'm not against corporations, but they're supposed to be representing me and you, not some guy with a lot of money. That's the point.
Yeah.
That's where democracy's at. That's where freedom's at.
Well, you bring up lobbies, and in that connection, this is a good time perhaps to talk about the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC. What is it, and what is its reason for being?
Yeah, ALEC is a group, a large group. I mean, John Boehner is a member of it. There are a number of politicians and large corporate entities are part of it. They write laws for states across the country and some local governments. A lot of the private prison problems we're seeing today with funding private prisons are written by groups like ALEC. And it's there to make money. For example, in a private prison, if the ALEC groups come up and the groups connected with it and say, we will give you money, we'll run your prisons, you'll make a profit, but you have to keep it 90% full. Then they have to pass some new laws. Guess who helps write the new laws to criminalize more behavior? ALEC. So they get money for it. It's the same corporate problem. I mean, we've had cases where little girls want lemonade stands, but there's a law against lemonade stands now. You have to have a $400 permit. We had one lady who wanted to give away bottled water on the street, give it away, not sell it. You can sell it in Phoenix, Arizona. It was 120 degrees a couple of years ago. She handed it out at a rally. She stood on a public sidewalk. The police confiscated the water, said it was against the law.
So in effect, that's a good Samaritan law.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, when she was doing it, well, it's against the law. We threatened to sue the city of Phoenix, and they changed the law, allowing people to hand out bottled water to people.
What a concept.
But again, we had to threaten to sue them. But those are laws written by groups like ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council. But they're there to, make money, promote business. So.
Let's talk about the iris scanner, John.
Mm-hmm.
I know in 2014 the FBI has a plan to have a database for this nationwide. You discuss this extensively in your book. To me, it's the ultimate metaphor for a society that's being watched, tracked, stamped, and numbered. And for those of us that remember The Prisoner, it might resonate.
Oh, The Prisoner is one of my favorites. Yeah, Patrick McGowan. Yeah. People should go back and watch that. In fact, my wife and I, Nisha, have gone back and watched it. It is so relevant. It's basically about a surveillance state, and the guy's a prisoner in a kind of a commune where everybody's happy. There's a lot of food to eat and a lot of materialism. Yeah, iris scanners are one part of the problem where they can actually study your retina, and it's even more accurate than fingerprinting. Police are already using them in some areas, like if you'll in the future, obviously, and again, the FBI is going to be using them by 2014 all over the country. When you walk into a store or whatever, you'll be identified immediately. And again, if you go back and watch the movie Minority Report, as I show, they use that in Minority Report, and that's all come true. And the FBI right now is trying to build a huge database, but the other component to this, and something we haven't talked about, is DNA. In a recent decision, the Supreme Court said they can force DNA from you now if you're arrested even for a minor crime. In other words, they force a swab into your mouth and take your DNA. The FBI wants a huge DNA database. So I talked to a few geneticists and said, what does that mean? There's a couple problems. I don't like the forced, people should be able to consent to it, but forced to give over your DNA. Geneticists tell me as far back as some of your distant relatives, they can tell whether or not you have aggressive tendencies. They can actually create a map of your personality. So in the future, what one geneticist said to me, he says, in the future at a public school or schools, they'll have your genetic map. Teachers will be alerted to you, probably on their laptops or whatever technology of that time, that student. Is he a rebel? Was he related to John Whitehead or Paynter or people like that? Does he have a tendency to be radical in the future?
It's very
this is what they're telling me, because there's a gene virtually for everything.
Well, you talk in the book about biometrics,
Yeah.
which goes to exactly what you're talking about, all the salient characteristics that people have.
But what I tell people is when you hear these things, like the DNA is forcing, the Supreme Court is forcing people to give their DNA over, what does that mean? Why is that happening in America? Why does the FBI want iris scanners? Why do they want our DNA, everybody's DNA? Well, they say it's like fingerprints. Well, not. Fingerprint can identify me, but what DNA does, it gives a profile of your entire history by the time you're born. So they tell me that that can be used as sort of a profiling of an individual. Okay, Jan Paynter, you were related to Thomas Paine. Ah, that rebel.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Well, we may have to watch you because you may have to be controlled. And we talked about drugs a little earlier. Drugs are rampant in society. I mean, prescription drugs, they're everywhere. In these cases that we get involved where People are put into mental hospitals, like the guy I talked about in the last program, Brandon Robb, a Marine who was arrested and put in a mental hospital for a Facebook post. We discovered through our research that a lot of the doctors connected in those mental institutions are representatives with the pharmaceutical industry.
Not a surprise.
So,
Yeah.
I'm saying is, research, know, think. I have a shirt that I wear, it just has one word across it, think. And people say, what does that mean? Think. When things happen, think about it.
Yeah, asking that question actually is kind of a tip-off. Let's talk a little bit about GPS technology. You touched on it in our earlier program. What are some of the greatest challenges to maintaining appropriate use of what, as you have said, could be a life-saving technology?
Oh, GPS, coming over to do your program today, we had GPS device. The problem with the GPS devices are several. One, it's run by the military. So it's monitored by the military. It's not a civilian thing. It's not a private thing. So you actually have the military scoping where you're going. Some states are actually introducing now electronic license plates, which will be tapped in not only by the GPS system, but by drones. So you'll be able to watch. So we're coming to a society that has absolutely no privacy. One of my friends is Steve LaCar, who argued the Supreme Court case of Antoine Jones, where the police put a GPS device on his car underneath without a warrant. Well, I helped him with the case. He comes down and speaks to me occasionally. But the Supreme Court's rule, you got to have a warrant to do that. But, again, with all the things we're seeing, if your car can be tracked now without even a GPS device, just from the electronic equipment on it, there is going to be no privacy. So what we've developed in our society is we've all become human goldfish, kind of. And that's when you're talking about these technologies, that's it. Everybody's looking in. As Orwell said, you have to live your life as if you're always being watched or listened to. And the question is, can you have a free society like that?
Oh, exactly.
I always say this, if I'm doing this all the time, who's watching me? Am I really free? Google's supposedly coming out with a new software they're going to be implementing. And the president admits it of Google, president of the corporation, that will identify problematic phrases. So if you're somewhat anonymous on Google, if you utter a problematic phrase, you're automatically reported to your boss and the government. So what's a problematic phrase? Let's see here. The government's gone too far. It might be time to get out on the streets and picket. Those are all problematic phrases. You can come up with many more. So the definition of privacy, you can do it under law all you want, but it's the cultural definition that's more important, because it's how the corporation views us or how the government views us now is things that are put in files. Like I said, the NSA computer in Utah that's so powerful, it actually parses the information, gives it to the agent, the FBI agent, Department of Homeland Security, and groups like that. So the computer is actually running the show, and the computer doesn't care about privacy.
Sure.
Drones will be able to hack into Wi-Fi networks, your cell phone, those things. If you're driving along, you think you have privacy in your car? Oh, no.
No, we're in the land of Hal.
You got it.
Years ago, I had a friend who came here. We used to email back and forth. And he said, you want to be very careful about particular words. I could be deported if I say certain things. I thought he was being rather paranoid then.
You don't have to be paranoid. I'll give you a really good story to illustrate this. We have a friend that lives north of Charlottesville here. And there's a lot of flyovers here, and our house rattled a few times. So we just emailed him. He used to work in some Secret Service stuff. We asked him what's going on. Well, he emailed back and said they're doing operations in the mountains here because it's similar to Pakistan or somewhere. It was one paragraph. The next day, 2 NSA agents showed up at his door with those guns, told him that if he did any more emails to Rutherford Institute on that subject, they would deport him. They would take him outside the country. He was in my office the next day crying. It's a former vet, scared to death. This happened in our local community. So, are we being watched? Yes. It's frightening. I mean, I know people who say, I won't say that now, I won't do that on text messages. This is America. You have to pre-censor yourself now because you're afraid someone's watching. You might be a little radical. scary.
Yeah, I have a friend of mine, and we always play a game. We always stop and say, "Hi, whoever's out there listening,"
Exactly.
because I have a landline for precisely that reason. But of course, I'm on a cell, so it cancels that out.
I had a radio show guy just email me, and he said, John, I want you to be on the show. I've read your book; it's really good. He said, but the feds already know what I'm saying anyway. So that's how I ended the email.
Oh yeah. A great irony I found in reading your book was the idea that security technology can also become a powerful job creator. So once again, we become complicit in this whole process.
There's a whole industry. The biggest employer in this country is the government. So when you're criticizing government, you're criticizing a lot of people, and some of them don't like it. I run into them. They say, "Yeah, we just don't like what you're saying." Then I run into good people who say we do. So there's a lot of them out there, but yeah, it does create jobs, and for contractors too. I mean, many Americans don't know that one of the biggest employers of government are private contractors. We heard about Halliburton, big, huge groups like that. Some of the groups over in Iraq that got in trouble for beating and shooting civilians were all private contractors that we, the taxpayer, pay for, and virtually no discipline for their activities.
John, would you speak to the increasing use of the so-called non-lethal weapons, which you talk a lot about in the book, and how they can slip through our observational radar and thus avoid citizen outcry?
Yeah, one thing people have to imagine, people say, where did we get what happened to us? And as I've written in a number of my other books, all the war technology, actually starting in World War II, is tested overseas and is brought home. One was tasers. Tasers were used first in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they came home to local police. Drones, as we all know, have been tested overseas. Now they're coming home. So what we're seeing is all these things come back. One is the non-lethal weapons, pepper spray, tasers, rubber bullets, sound cannons, which can smash your eardrums, by the way. I've actually seen, was it 2009 Pittsburgh, they used sound cannons against American citizens there at a protest. People scatter because they pierce your eardrums, and some people go deaf because of it. There's even Rumsfeld's ray gun. This is another really weird device that actually shoots an electromagnetic beam at you, and it makes your skin heat up. In test subjects, they tell people to not have zippers or anything metal because those things light up and burn you.
That's incredible.
Used against American citizens, though, out on the street, you're not going to be able to, you might have your keys in your pocket, zuba, you're going to have a burned leg. These are all available, and they are now in the possession of government agents in our country. Hopefully they'll not be used, but I wouldn't count on it if people get radical, such as the Occupy. Remember 2011, the Occupy people were brutally put down. I show pictures of Dora Lee Rainey, I think it was Seattle, Oakland, the 80-year-old woman. She's walking along with pepper spray dripping down her face. The fellow at Berkeley, the policeman, who pepper sprayed students who were sitting down bent over. So there you go. It can be very, very dangerous. But at first, we have to remember, it's tested overseas, and guess who makes the money off of that? The corporate interests that make these things.
It's interesting you bring out in the book, too, that people are a bit lulled into false sense of security because this technology of non-lethal weaponry seems to be less offensive to people than, say, what happened to Rodney King.
Yeah, but
because
I show
you
in my
don't
book.
see what's occurring.
Little old ladies in their front yard are getting tasered. There was a 5-year-old kid about a month ago, somewhere got tasered. I read about it. He got tasered by a policeman. And one was pepper spray. These are children and older ladies.
John, I wanted to circle back. In the first program you talked about drone technology, which figures prominently in the book. What would constitute appropriate use of drones in your view? Oh,
drones can be, again, for rescues, a number of things, putting out border fires. They can put the right kind of implements on them. That's why they need to be regulated, because the biggest fear I have for drones is they'll put free speech protesters down. And let me explain. It's the miniature drones we have to worry about, the hummingbird drones. Go on YouTube, I tell people, and watch the hummingbird drone. It looks like a hummingbird. You can't tell the difference between it. It can come up to your window and film you, listen to you. There's a new prototype mosquito drone, which they say will be used to extract DNA from you. It'll land on you, you won't be able to see it. But we all know what mosquitoes do. They inject. So Again, I go back to a protest. If you want to put down a protest really silently and everybody got drunk or went away, you just send in some mosquito drones. They actually have dragonfly drones that fly in unison. And coming down the street with weapons, what are you going to do? It's not like it used to be where the police would walk up and say, what are you out here for? What authority? You have to move on. When people see dragonfly drones and they know what they are, they're going to run and hide.
Well, and again, what you brought out earlier, which is the potential use by non-military, non-governmental corporations, companies, marketing to individuals is chilling.
I had a student study with me last summer. He said, I got something to show you, Mr. Whitehead. I went out, a brilliant kid, John Hopkins, pulls his drone out, unfolded it, and flew it around the office. So people are already using drones under FAA airspace.
I know another thing, John, that people are concerned about is President Obama signing off on roughly a third of all the drone strikes, and that this sets troubling presidential precedent for years to come. Can we ever hope, John, do you feel that the courts will be able to keep pace with drone technology?
No, I don't think they will. I've been a lawyer for 40 years. Arguing in the courts now has become much more difficult. The courts themselves, they're human beings. The judges are not any different than you or I. Some may be less intelligent. I don't know. I mean, I talk to judges that don't seem to understand the Constitution. We want to argue in the courts, but I don't think the courts are going to be the ultimate answer. I always say the American people, we the people, are going to be the ultimate answer, but it's going to be, as we've seen with recent Supreme Court decisions in Kentucky versus King, if a SWAT team arrives at your door and it's the wrong address and they have no warrant, if they think you're doing something illegal, they can go through your door. 8-1 decision, Supreme Court. Ruth Bader Ginsburg said it was the end of the Fourth Amendment. They think you're doing something illegal, they can go through your door. Well, people get shot and killed in those raids. So there's been even worse Supreme Court decisions than that recently. The age of the Warren Court that I revered, the Miranda warnings, I mean, they don't even have to give you Miranda warnings now, a recent Supreme Court case, if you're taken into custody but not arrested. That's awful. If you stand on the Fifth Amendment, the Supreme Court now upheld an opinion saying, if you stand on your right to not be incriminated, that's evidence of guilt. That can be seen as evidence of guilt.
John, I wanted to ask you about the Ninth Amendment, which happens to be a favorite of mine. And in doing research for a prior program on the Constitution, what I discovered is that certain members of the Supreme Court abhor the Ninth Amendment. And I wonder why you think that is.
I think they abhor both the Ninth and the 10th Amendment, which basically coalesce into one thing, saying that we, the people, have all these rights, we retain them, and state and local bodies are basically under the principle of federalism. When I say federalism, a lot of times people go, what's that? What federalism says is America is not a national government. It wasn't intended to be. It's a conglomerate of national, county, state, towns, and they all have this political power. And then you have we, the people. We have any rights not mentioned in the Bill of Rights, we still retain. So it gives a great amount of power to local communities and the people. If you want a large national government that's going to intrude in everybody's life, you're not going to like the 9th and 10th Amendments. In fact, you're going to be a little disdainful of the Bill of Rights, which I see all the time. I mean, I've talked to a few policemen who are just like, they growl at you when you mention the Fourth Amendment. They shouldn't. They should reach out and give me a hug and say, well, at least you know what it means. So the way things change in America positively are not top down, it's from bottom up.
Oh, very much
I always tell people this. Yeah. What's the 3 most beautiful words in the English language? We the people. That's how the Constitution begins. If we're going to change the things, it's up to us to do it. Look in the mirror, and if you're not participating, go out and participate and look in that mirror and congratulate yourself.
I wanted to leave people with some positive solutions, because that's how you end your book, and that's what we believe on this program. So let's discuss some positive solutions that we can take. You describe Martin Luther King and the example of nonviolence, which I know is extremely important to you. What primacy going forward can we give to education and understanding so that we can familiarize ourselves with the Bill of Rights, which you enumerate in the closing pages of the book?
Yeah, the schools, as I say, the civics education is not well taught these days. I think you can do it at home, though. I mean, numerous groups like Rutherford Institute. Now we have Bill of Rights pamphlets you can teach your kids at school. I think people need to organize locally. If you believe in freedom and you want freedom, it's like we did in Charlottesville. We passed a drone law regulating drones. You can do that, but you have to get involved. That means getting out of your house, sometimes skipping a trip to the mall to take a trip down to your local governmental body. You can do those things. I tell people we all have this technology now, get hooked up electronically, groups. You'll be watched, but if you're nonviolent and legal, you get in trouble, you call people like the Rutherford Institute and other groups that might want to help. I think in the end, though, and I talk a lot about Martin Luther King, especially in the end of the book, he said he reached the point of no return. Was he going to take action or sit back and watch? And he just decided he was going to take action. And what happened? The Civil Rights Acts, we got that. We got African Americans into the culture where they were crammed in places, unsavory places in the South and otherwise. And he changed the face of the nation, but he did it through nonviolence. I hear a lot of people talking about violence these days. Violence does not work. I mean, all the great thinkers from Tolstoy, who was a great advocate of nonviolence and a great writer, Gandhi, you go down the list, the principle of Jesus in the New Testament, all nonviolence. So there are people I run today, they're stockpiling weapons, bombs, guns, and what I tell them is, in the end, that's not going to be it. You may shoot somebody, but you're not going to change things that way. You're thinking like the people in the Soviet Union thought who took over government. We don't want violent revolution. All revolution means is a turning over. I want to see a revolution, but I want to see a revolution of peace and where we treat people with dignity and where we promote freedom. People say, well, you sound like a salesman. I sure am. I'm a salesman of freedom.
John, thank you very much for spending such a considerable and worthwhile amount of time with us today and for doing 2 programs. I think it's so important that people hear what you have to say.
And thanks for your good work, too.
Thank you very much. Blind obedience to power is just that, blind. In my view, this is a distortion of what the statue of Blind Lady Justice was designed to convey. These days, her statue may serve as a powerful, double-edged metaphor for guarding against unintended consequences of the abuse of law in our democratic republic. As I wrote in the mission statement for this program 4 years ago, people are their principals. Most particularly at this time in our nation's history, how and what we collectively decide will define what is meant by the word American. Perhaps then, it is worth seriously considering the idea of living up to the ideals of our best selves as our founders envisioned it, and seek to fully engage, become informed, and participate in our democracy, even if, at times, that becomes uncomfortable. John's wonderfully well-researched and insightful book, which we have been discussing today, is a noteworthy call to action in the service of preserving our founders' ideals for a fully free and representative democracy. Thank you again, John, for doing this today.
Thank you.
Thank you at home for joining our conversation. If you would like more information concerning the issues under discussion today, we invite you to take a look at our website at politicsmatters.org. We will be posting a number of books, articles, and relevant links on many of the issues under discussion today there for you. You will also find a complete archive of all prior Politics Matters programs, which you may watch in their entirety at any time. We will also be posting extended versions of the interviews online as well on our new site, and we will continue to be adding more content. As always, we're very interested in hearing from you with any questions, ideas, and concerns for future programs. We encourage you to email us at jan@politicsmatters.org. We air on PBS, WVPT on the last Sunday of every month at 11:30 a.m. Thank you again, and until next we meet, I'm Jan Paynter, and this is Politics Matters.